Hello everyone, welcome to Broadview. My name is Joseph. Today we're going to be talking about the most thrilling 10 hours in recent human history. In just 10 critical hours, two incidents happened one after another in the Eastern and Western Hemispheres, respectively, which almost led to an entire extinction of humankind. Clearly that didn't happen, and thank goodness for that. These 10 critical hours were October 27, 1962, from 11:15 a.m. to 21:15 p.m. Washington time. Okay, let's unravel these 10 hours and find out what happened. In Okinawa, Japan, at 12:15 a.m. Tokyo time, a secret US military base stationed in Okinawa received instructions to confirm that the operations center had been set to DEFCON 2 state. The DEFCON 2 alert means that DEFCON 1 alert state is to be set within 2 minutes for all the preparations to be ready. Now, once the DEFCON 1 alert is ordered, the missile launch team must have all missiles fired within 1 minute of receiving the launch order. At the time, a soldier named John Bourdonnais, who served for Captain William Bassett, was on duty and received an encrypted message. They checked the content as usual, and a short time later the message was decoded. No one could believe what they were reading. Command, launch the missile immediately. In this missile base, there were 4 teams responsible for 32 Mace B missiles, all of which were equipped with Mark 28 nuclear warheads. Each warhead was 70 times more powerful than the Hiroshima atomic bomb, with a range of 2,250 kilometers, covering areas such as Vietnam, China, North Korea, and the Soviet Union. Any unfortunate city targeted with such a nuclear explosion would instantly evaporate, and nuclear radiation would remain for a long time. Bassett didn't execute the order immediately. He obviously had a good head on his shoulders. Instead, he called other teams at the base to confirm. They had also received the command and were already preparing to attack the target. Hesitant and confused, Bassett questioned why the team hadn't received the DEFCON 1 alert before the ultimate launch order. The other team launch officer said that maybe the enemy's missile had been launched and a world nuclear war had just broken out, which would explain why the commander then had to quickly skip the first level alert state. Now, the situation was in critical condition and we couldn't afford any delay. Then, according to the launch process, Bassett read out the 4 targets on the list. All of the team members were shocked because 3 of the 4 targets were not in the Soviet Union. At that moment, the launch officer of another team called in and said that there were only 2 targets in the Soviet Union on their list. Why were they ordered to launch nuclear missiles against non-belligerent countries? Bassett resisted the pressure and called the Missile Operations Center, saying that the original order was not clearly transmitted. Please transmit all the instruction code. He hoped that this would allow the officers in the command center to notice that the original transmission's coded instruction was an error and would use the retransmission to rectify the issue. However, the code from the second transmission remained the same, a command to launch the missile. One of the teams could hardly wait any longer because all 4 attack targets on their list were in the Soviet Union. They believed that the order was unmistaken and that the missile should be launched immediately. Facing such an emergency, Bassett ordered 2 armed airmen to, quote, shoot the lieutenant if he tried to launch without either verbal authorization from the senior officer in the field or the upgrade of DEFCON 1 by Missile Operations Center, end quote. At that time, the opposing team also sent 2 airmen to Bassett to force him to launch missiles. 2 groups of US troops had now drawn their guns in the room, and the situation was most definitely critical. At this harrowing moment, Captain Bassett called the Missile Operations Center and said over the phone that he either needed to hear that the threat level had been raised to DEFCON 1 and that he should fire the nukes, or that he should stand down. A nervous shout came from over the phone. Quote, don't launch, make sure you don't launch, end quote. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The soldiers who had drawn their guns finally eased up. This turned out to be a shocking mistake by the commander in the Missile Operations Center. Talk about having a rough day at work. This person's mistake could have done irreversible harm and killed countless lives. At 12:45 a.m., 30 minutes since the first command, humankind had a very close call with its demise. 2 hours and 18 minutes later in Havana, Cuba, at 14:03 or 2:03 Washington time, the Cuban government announced that it had shot down a US U-2 spy plane and claimed to be ready to attack the United States if and whenever necessary. By 4 p.m., the US government had already considered it would make final preparations for the war. This has become known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. The cause of the crisis is as follows. In 1961, the United States deployed nuclear bombs to Turkey, which is close to the Soviet Union. So major Soviet cities, including Moscow, were within the missile range. The Soviet Union then took action to countermeasure it by secretly deploying nuclear bombs to Cuba. Thus, major cities of the United States would also fall within the range of Soviet missiles. On October 14, 1962, US intelligence discovered Soviet missiles deployed in Cuba. Consequently, the US Army immediately surrounded Cuba from all sides. Not to be outdone, the Soviet Union said it would retaliate with no hesitation if US forces dared to attack any Soviet-flagged vessel. The situation became less and less controllable, and on October 27th, at the height of the crisis, Cuba shot down the American U-2 aircraft, which could well have been the spark that ignited a world war. Known as Black Saturday, it was a day when the world held its breath. Time passed, and by 16:59 or 4:59 p.m., the situation was once again out of control. A US Navy destroyer, DD-508, dropped what are called depth charges in Cuban waters, attempting to attack a Soviet submarine that was hiding at the bottom of the sea. About a week before, the US warship spotted the Soviet submarine and had been following it since. Now, the Soviet submarine was surrounded by 12 US destroyers. The situation was extremely tense. The surrounded Soviet submarine, B-59, had been hiding for a week. The air conditioning had stopped working. The temperature inside the cabin was nearly 50 degrees Celsius. Each of the crew members could only get 1 glass of water per day to survive. Now, there were only 3 options for them to choose. The first was to continue to hide until air runs out, never surrender, instead defend Soviet dignity to death. The second one was to resurface and surrender. And the third one was to launch torpedoes to attack the surrounding US warships. But this would also mean that the US and the Soviet Union would officially be at war. At 17:29 or 5:29 p.m., the US forces dropped another depth charge on B-59. This time the bombs were more powerful than the previous ones, and the damage to the submarine shell was substantial. During the week they submerged, they had completely lost contact with the outside world. Now that the US forces had used such weapons against them, the B-59 captain saw this as a sign indicating the breakout of war. And the main reason they came to Cuba was to support Soviet Union in the coming war. They thought they shouldn't wait for death or surrender. Instead, they should fire torpedoes and join the war immediately. The political commissar also agreed with the captain's decision, and the crew members immediately got ready for the battle. Now all of them were only waiting for the order to attack the US destroyer. However, according to procedures, the captain, the political commissar, and the vice commander must all approve to fire before launching the torpedoes. At this time, the second in command of the submarine suddenly stood up and said, quote, "I do not agree to launch the torpedoes," end quote. It was Vasily Arkhipov. As a matter of fact, Arkhipov knew something critically secret that nobody else on board except the captain and himself were aware of. The torpedoes equipped on this ship were in fact nuclear bombs. He understood clearly that the moment nuclear torpedoes were launched, it would result in the breakout of nuclear war between both countries. The situation could be out of control and the world would be destroyed completely. By 17:58 or 5:58 p.m., the third US depth charges hit them. Apparently, the US forces didn't know that they were bombing a Soviet submarine loaded with nuclear torpedoes. The captain insisted on fighting back against the US attack, but Arkhipov was absolutely not in support. He believed that the war had not yet broken out and the bombs hitting them were not an act of war. Within the submarine, they came to a deadlock. Eventually, as 21:15 or 8:15 p.m. rolled around, the world's destiny was changed. The Soviet documents have not been declassified, and we really have no idea what happened in the submarine during the 3 hours that passed. But finally, at 8:15 p.m., the B-59 surfaced and signaled its surrender in the middle of the night. Sure enough, Arkhipov was correct. There was no war breaking out. The Americans didn't embarrass the surface submarine or get on board for inspection. They simply watched them leave the area. 2 miracles in 10 hours. 10 hours before, the American Captain Basset defied the military order and prevented nukes from being launched. Then, a Soviet commander named Arkhipov avoided a nuclear war again. What's even more unbelievable is that a dramatic change occurred the next day, October 28th. The US suddenly announced the withdrawal of missiles deployed in Turkey, and the Soviet Union simultaneously announced the withdrawal of missiles deployed in Cuba. The Cuban Missile Crisis was suddenly resolved and ended in peace with an agreement reached by the two countries. Now let's focus back on those two heroes, Basset and Arkhipov. What they ended up getting after saving the world might surprise you. In May 2015, a veteran of the US Air Force was talking to a reporter with eyes full of tears. Over 50 years later, he was eventually allowed to reveal the truth of what happened on Okinawa Island in 1962. He was then Air Force Airman John Bourdonnais, who received the order of missile launch. But the hero who stopped the nuclear launch, William Basset, had died 4 years earlier. John said he would always remember those terrifying 30 minutes. John was right next to the phone when Basset was making the call to the command center. It was as if time had stood still when they heard the voice of the other end of the phone shout, "Don't launch, make sure you don't launch," with everyone gasping for air in relief. It was October, the temperature was not hot, but their clothes were soaked. John said that in front of the shocked soldiers, Basset spoke again. Quote, "This was a mistake. Although we saved the world by choosing not to launch, we will neither be recognized nor be rewarded. Remember, this has never happened. None of us are allowed to talk about any of this from now on," end quote. Later, the US government launched an investigation. It turned out that a major had miscommunicated the command code. Basset kept his mouth shut and never talked about it to his friends or family until he died in 2011. He never received any form of appreciation, and his heroic action was only revealed 4 years after his death. Let's move on to the life of another hero, Arkhipov. After returning to the Soviet Union, Arkhipov, like all the other crew members, were badly gossiped about. And some of the members even threw stones at Arkipov's house, calling him a coward for being afraid to fire the torpedoes. But the truth is, no one else knew, except for the Soviet top brass, the captain, and Arkhipov himself, that it was nuclear torpedoes on their submarine at the time. Like Basset, Arkhipov took the secret to his grave, along with the accusations of others. In 2002, 4 years after his death, at the 40th anniversary conference of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a top Soviet officer revealed the secret of the nuclear torpedoes and shared this story to the public. With his great leadership skills, Arkhipov helped the captain and the crew members calm down. But even then, he never disclosed that his launch refusal was because of the nuclear torpedoes. Upon hearing this story at the conference, an American historian said, "The US-Soviet nuclear war would have been inevitable if Arkhipov had agreed to launch at that time. If the first nuclear torpedoes had been launched, more nuclear weapons from different American and Soviet Union bases would have been launched within a few hours. The power would be enough to destroy the planet 100 times over." This historian was an advisor to President Kennedy back then, and he experienced the whole thing firsthand, so his statement was by no means something sensational. So it seems that heroes aren't necessarily always powerful politicians, generals who have won grand battles on the field, or the Marvel and DC figures often seen on screen. Heroes are perhaps just ordinary people who have withstood the pressure in difficult situations, and who have been able to guard their inner sense of responsibility, their conscience, and reverence to lives. Heroes are the people who can make a decision for the sake of humanity, regardless of the tensions and pressures of their time. Putting others first and considering the impact of our words and actions, the ripple effect of them, is something we can all do to begin making a difference. The world needs more men and women of character who will not compromise what is right for what is convenient or expedient. We owe a lot of thanks to the two heroes who were rarely known to the public. It is because of the contributions of thousands of unknown heroes like Arkhipov and Basset that today we can live life in a peaceful world. Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.